sure enough, the cell is reversing. And you can see that when we measure the voltage across these cells, when they're discharging, they're normally about 1.2 volts. And this one cell with sort of the crud around it is negative 0.3 volts. And so it's called a cell reversal because the voltage reverses across the cell as the current flows through once it's already flat. So we would take the cell out, find a replacement cell of the same type, solder a new set of tab interconnects, and then you can see the improvement. So this was her battery pack. When we first tested it and when we sent it to her, it gave the capacity of 8 amp hours. You can see that one of those cells is still cutting out just before the pack. We suspect that's the cell that 150 cycles later was cutting out after just 5 amp hours. And after we did the cell replacement, which is the green curve, we now have a perfectly smooth discharge with no cell reversal. So this was all 2006, 2007, and we seemed pretty optimistic that understanding this and having the equipment to test the batteries would mean that we could offer a guarantee of reliability that wouldn't be possible with somebody who's just buying and refilling a pack without actually QCing it. Yeah?
What did you finally do about figuring out how to limit the charge so you could get to an optimum point? I mean,
we ended up buying commercial battery chargers that have a temperature sensor in it.
The temperature sensor.
That's right. Now,
Okay.
I'll talk a little bit about different chargers here. Yeah, so my first battery, I'll tell you some of the things I did before I realized we had to go that route. This seems like a rosy picture that, sure, statistically some cells might be bad, but we can identify those, fix and replace them, and have some of these batteries continue running so that they don't throw away a battery just because there's one cell that's done. Anyway, so a little bit back to the chargers. So some of the very first battery packs we had, we didn't have a proper charge that would sense the temperature, but I knew that if we just charged it for the right amount of time, then you could stop the charge, the battery would be charged and warm, it wouldn't suffer any damage. That worked fine on the first 4 discharges. The 5th time, I didn't calculate how much I had used quite correctly, and I woke up in the morning to burbling, smoke-filled basement as the cell experienced that exact same problem, just a runaway current as it receives too much charge into it. At the time, and still to this day, the battery chargers have a very, very high failure rate. So this is one of the nickel metal hydride chargers that came with the battery pack, and within 2 or 3 days of using it, it just erupts in sparks and flames. So this company, I just sent them a photo. They said that. They said, "Oh, no problem. We'll send you a replacement charger." I said, "Okay, just don't send the same type. It's clearly just a piece of crap charger." So they sent a new charger. Now, as you asked before about the chargers, they're temperature sensing. So there's a 3-pin connector. There's power and ground to flow to the current, and then a 3rd wire that senses the temperature of the battery, and it stops the charging once it's detected the temperature rise, which I showed you in that temperature graph. The replacement charger that was sent to us didn't have a 3 connector. It had just 2, just plus and minus. And if we go back to that first graph, you can see that even without sensing the temperature, you could also look at the voltage, see when the voltage reaches its maximum and starts to go down again, and then sense that dropping voltage and such a charge drop in. So I assumed, okay, well, they sent us a charger that uses negative voltage peak detection. This happens usually after the temperature's already gotten quite warm, so it damages the battery a little bit more to get it that hot to the point that the voltage drops. But it still is a used method of peak charge determination. So this was Kenny. He bought a nickel metal hydride battery pack through the ebike club, and 2 days. So the original battery charger failed from the previous photo. We got replacement chargers in with the 2-prong connector, and I tested it in my own lab beforehand with the battery. I was curious to know if it worked properly. The next morning, the battery was lightly warm to the touch. It seemed like the charge had terminated, and so I presumed it was a voltage-sensing battery charger. I get a phone call from the fire department, actually. And the day before, the first time that Kenny got a chance to plug in his charger and run it, he was woken up at night by what he said sounded like popcorn. I think it was probably louder than popcorn. And the battery pack was charging. The cells started to burst and explode. And they were in his hallway, so he was in enough presence of mind to grab the battery in his bag and drag it out onto their porch before it caused any more damage inside to the house. As he was dragging it, the cells were still bursting and exploding, and launching the cans with enough velocity that it was puncturing right through the soffit under his patio porch, tore through the siding on the side of the wall, put a hole into the ceiling. They found some cell casings in the attic. And then I was presented with this, which is the remains of the battery pack. So this was a battery charger. That charger had a label on it that said nickel metal hydride charger, which had been printed on a piece of paper and glued to the casing. And for all we know, and I'm 100% sure, it was just a lead acid battery charger that they had put a nickel metal hydride label on. And so they asked not to get the same charger for it.
What company was that?
What's that?
What company was that?
The name of the company was ABF. We still get spam email from them about every 2 weeks trying to sell us their latest lithium battery. And so I'm not totally sure of clearly the chargers overcharge cells. Why they then continue, once one cell explodes and there's no more charge current going through because that interrupts the circuit. But nonetheless, the cells kept going off one after another. So I think the combination of the heat and the overcharge was allowing them to short circuit. And I'm guessing that when they're fully charged and short-circuited, it releases energy faster than the release valve can vent, and then causes the cell to burst. And maybe the shock of that causes the neighboring cell to short-circuit, and then a few minutes later it gets hot enough that it explodes. I wasn't there to witness it, but it happened over quite a span of time, and the cells were no longer even having current into them. They were just completely broken from the circuit, but still bursting at random times. So yeah, that's what the insides of the cell look like. This is Tim Eiserman. He got the battery pack, the exact same battery pack at the exact same time. They were both over building their e-bikes on the same weekend. This happened to Kenny first, so I told Tim not to charge his battery. And we contacted a local electric bike store to get a quality nickel metal hydride battery charger for him. And his battery, when we tested it back in 2005, looked beautiful. It discharged a full 12 amp hours, no cell reversals. Tim happily used his battery. 2 years later, he was still using it. He said the range was a bit less, the speed wasn't quite as good. After 3 years, I was like, you can't still be using that battery. He's like, oh yeah, no, it gets me to work and back or to school and back. So I told him to bring it in for testing, and so he comes by 3 years later in 2008, and the battery, which originally gave 12 amp hours, is still actually giving a full 9 amp hours before the first cell reversal, and then the remaining cells, quite a few of them, are still good for 11 amp hours. And he's been using this on a basically daily basis, so it's some boost to the claim that batteries can last for 500 or 600 cycles as the manufacturers state. He didn't want to get a new battery yet until finally, 5 years later, earlier this year, he finally said that it just wasn't putting out what he needed, and the battery would be shot just after 4 amp hours. But nonetheless, 2 batteries from exactly the same batch. One explodes in an inferno on the first week, the other one lasts for 5 years and gives the guy some 20,000, 30,000 kilometers of commuting on it. Another danger with the manner in which nickel-based batteries charge, you saw the charge, the voltage goes up and then goes down. A lot of people run 2 or 3 batteries in their e-bike to get more range. If those batteries are connected together, then you're charging them in parallel. And if one of those 2 batteries happens to have its voltage go up and start to decrease before the second battery does, then current from that second battery will flow